Thank you all, everyone for coming today to another LIAFPN meeting. Bloom will be co-hosting at some point as struggling with my computer phone connections today. We're very excited to know that a lot of changes coming tax world for all you recovering accountants of yesterday that still have lots of work to do. I pity you and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge. As you know, there are several tax changes, both federal proposed and statewide, and one of them in the state of New York, at least, is that cannabis is now just legalized. We're lucky to have an accounting firm who has worked with the past and is very knowledgeable about the of cannabis. And with that, I'll let whoever's taking over, if it's going to be Jason or Eliyahu, take it away.
Sure. Eliyahu is going to share his screen, have a little presentation for everyone. Of course, every time cannabis gets legalized or it opens up in a state, either medical or recreationally, a lot of questions, a lot of professionals want to know whether or not what they can do to make money on the space, what the laws are, and what really is cannabis and why is it so unique outside of the ordinary cost of business. So with me today is my part of my cannabis team. Eliyahu, who is running the screen, is part of our consulting and cannabis staff. We do a lot of consulting work in the space. And Ryan, who's a tax manager and also part of the cannabis team. Tax, you're going to see as we go through the presentation, really runs a large portion of whether or not it's going to be a profitable industry in the state, whether or not you can, really make a good business model, and the cost of the product. Everything comes down to really taxes. Today we're going to talk about a few things. One is understanding the industry. I don't think anyone, no matter if you're an insurance broker or you're an accountant, lawyer, money manager, whatever you're doing, banker, I don't think you can do anything inside an industry without understanding the industry. I get calls all the time from accountants, at least, that take on like one cannabis client, and really scary what they're doing. And we're involved in tons of merger and acquisitions. Really, really scary sometimes what we see in due diligence. And we're going to talk about what is a cannabis client and what you should know, and what would it take to get into the, take on a cannabis client. Obviously, then we'll talk about the New York legalization bill, and that's hot on everyone's mind, and also the Safe Banking Act that the federal government's passed, and what that's going to change for cannabis. So what professionals need to know is one of the biggest things. Cannabis is a great industry, and there's a lot of money to be made, but there's still some fundamental questions that people have to ask themselves. And should I take on a cannabis client is the first one. I got into this space about 9 years ago, and everyone that saw it as a business development part of view, they went into it. I actually got into it. I'll tell you, the personal story is I had some friends that were raising some money. They were going to open up a grow in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and they would go for licensing. And they came to me, and I kind of was like, well, I don't know anything about the space. This is 9 years ago. I was like, please, let's go out and find the right people. I ended up interviewing with them, helping them find somebody. We ended up interviewing 6 accounting firms, some in Colorado, 2 in New York, 1 in New Jersey, 1 in California. And after we met with all of them, got back together with my friends, and kind of was like, they just looked at me, they're like, they weren't impressed. They were spitting out the same things that they saw on every article. My friends read 2 or 3 articles, and that's exactly what they were hearing from these people. Nothing new, nothing, changed. And that's when I decided, okay, I need to get into this space and really get some real professionals. And some of the firms we're talking about are big firms, and I really felt they didn't do their due diligence before they got into the space. Should I take on this cannabis client or get into the industry? I don't ever recommend any professional get into an industry if they're going to take on 1 or 2 clients. You're never going to spend enough time in the industry to really help your clients. Cannabis is a little different even still, because it's very specific regulatory, tax, legal specific things just to cannabis. And if I've friends calling me now that are other accounts. Oh, now that it's legal in New York, our firm's going to get into it. Well, that's great, but do you understand the industry? I keep on coming back to this because it really is, you're not doing your clients any favor by saying you'll take them on, and then not giving them good advice. You also have to be careful about the laws that govern your industry. Um, since I joined Janover about 3.5 years ago, I came on with about 5 years experience in cannabis, or maybe at that time 6 years experience in cannabis. Um, and it's amazing. It really is amazing that we had to change engagement letters. We had to make sure that we put policies in place for our staff that might have been going there and auditing a cannabis company. We had to talk to our insurance company. All these things play into it. And if you don't know about it, then you're really just, and is it time to learn all that stuff for one client really worth it? Our advice to every expert is always become an expert. Take your time and become an expert before you take on the client. Consider the reputational risk, right? If you screw up something and you get sued, and your insurance company might not even know that you did cannabis, and we had to have a rider put onto our insurance that we did it, and we had to notify our insurance carrier, they might not even cover you. And then know your clients inside and out. A lot of cannabis clients aren't just cannabis; they're real estate. They're other things that, if you don't know about the space, you got to ask. One thing I always like saying is, in every, I started in real estate. I still am in real estate. Cannabis is my second industry that I do. At Janover, we try to do two industries, but when I look at leases and loans and mortgages, there are every lease in New York City, every loan in New York City I've ever seen has requirements that you can't do anything that's against the law federally, and they specifically itemize, the Controlled Substances Act and say it. So now all of a sudden these people go, oh, let me go rent to a marijuana company, and even still in the lease it says you can't do cannabis. And still they do the lease. And if you don't know about this, if you're a real estate person and your clients renting to a cannabis company, you still want to get a cannabis expert involved. Plus the lease, the way you do it might indicate you are subject to certain rules and regulations. It's good practice to know every client, obviously, and given the unique nature of cannabis industry, once again, it touches other industries. Let's really try to get there. My biggest change in cannabis was like the people that are in cannabis. It's really a different type of person. Now, the last 2 years, we've seen a lot more, Wall Street people leave Goldman Sachs and start a cannabis company, or somebody leave JP Morgan and start and get into cannabis, or start a financing company. There's now tons of REITs out there that do cannabis. Before the last few years, though, the people were really these out of the box thinkers, these people that were not just business people. They were really, they love the cannabis space, and working with them has been a lot different. They don't want you to come to their offices with a suit and tie on, right? They want to see a more relaxed feel. They want to know that you're behind them, not and you feel the same way about them, not just that, oh, this is another client. So really, once again, it's a different world that they're living in, especially since some of these people that made millions upon millions of dollars selling licenses and stuff, they started 15 years ago, before any of us ever really thought it was going to become legal in some of these states. So it's a really interesting world, and understanding them and their journey is really important. Sorry, I'm just going to catch up. So what happened in New York? It was, I'm just trying to think, it was about almost 2014 where they started, and they came out with the medical rules. Medical was very interesting because New York did it a lot different than other states. It was very, very high regulatory. Then they gave out some more medical licenses. They tried to relax the rules, and then basically they were working for the last 3 years on trying to get recreational cannabis out there. And what basically happened was the pandemic made it so they needed the tax revenue. And that's really what happened. We were talking for the 2 years prior with some of the people that were working to try to, in New York State, to try to get it legalized. We were working with Cuomo's team, and it was really interesting to see, like, they were really just all about the taxes, all about the revenue sources. And sometimes that's good for cannabis and sometimes that's bad. We'll talk about, like, right now, what's going on in the state and how this is working. Oh yeah, you can go to the next slide. First, what this law did is establish as an Office of Cannabis Management. It's going to be modeled very similar to the Office of Alcohol, and the licenses are going to be very similar too. It expands New York's existing medical marijuana program. Once again, we go into the medical marijuana program. There was never enough patients to sustain this program in New York because it was so highly regulatory. Doctors had to take special classes, they had to get special insurance. There was huge liability on them if they wrote scripts. So and then it was years before even nurses can take those classes. So what happened was it was very slow to get patients into the program. It creates a licensing system that we're going to find out a lot more about when the regs come out. And what it really does, and this is what you're hearing nationwide, is it develops a social economic equity program. We don't know what the program's going to look like, but they did say that there's going to be 50% of the licenses will go to minority and women-owned businesses. What that means, we'll still see in the regs. The big part of what I think this law does is it changes some of the legal aspects. So it's not even tax or audit or accounting or even licensing. It changes a lot of these legal things that you see in New York. Adults, which are defined as 21 years and older. By the way, Ryan, Yahoo, jump in if you have something to add. Can hold and purchase cannabis license from retailers. It's basically like, now any retailer can, if you're over 21, you don't need a license, you can walk in and buy product. There are no longer penalties for public possession. And this is a big one, because 3 ounces of cannabis flower, 24 grams of cannabis is huge. 3 ounces, to give you an idea, is about 50 to 75 pre-rolled joints. And you're allowed to hold that on your body at any time with no penalty. I don't know if there's any heavy smokers in the room or anyone that's used it in college a long time ago. But think about carrying 50 to 75 pre-rolled joints. I use the word pre-rolled joints because it's an industry term. It's not just rolling them yourself. And then people can store up to 5 pounds of cannabis flower in their house. Now, believe it or not, the industry is moving away from flower. It's really going to end up being drinks and edibles. But 5 pounds of flower is ridiculously large amount. They're basically making it so you're never going to get arrested for carrying marijuana on you again. Then there's even a bigger change. Now you can actually cultivate your own plants for personal use. They didn't define what personal use is. If you have a dinner party and you have people over, is that personal use? But each adult can have up to 6 plants with a limit of 12 plants per household. That is a lot of product. The fact that you can have 12 plants for a husband and wife, and you can hold 5 pounds, and you can travel all around New York with 75 joints on you, that is a big change. It's really gonna change the way it's perceived in New York over the long term.
Jason,
there's
that's
other
a
legal
question.
changes.
When is this effective in terms of carrying?
It's already effective. It's effective as of the date that it was signed. Already, there's been stuff coming out. The NYPD commissioner basically said they're not going to be stopping anybody on the street anymore for smell of cannabis. That's going to be walked away. You can smoke a joint in public as long as it's a smoking area. So this is already law. So you're already allowed to do this. Now, the problem is the regs haven't come out. So it didn't talk about like plants and THC. Once again, we're going to go, as we go more into it, you're going to see that New York's a very highly regulated state. So the regulations are going to say a lot about what kind of plants you can have, how much THC, blah, 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 blah. And it didn't talk about processing, right? So the plants are great. And for the older school people that just love smoking a joint, that's great. Millennials and below, it's all about the edibles and the drinks and all that stuff, which you still can't do in your house, right? You still can't process. But we're going to see what the regulations say. But the legal changes are effective. They're good to go. The problem is, I don't know where you'd buy 5 pounds because they haven't had any legal places yet, right? So then they probably get you for buying it illegally on the black market.
That's the thing we always speak
they're
about,
trying to,
Jason. The black market,
yeah.
Since New York's going to be so highly regulated, I think we always talk about like this is such a great bill and things are being passed and it's going to be accessible, but will the black market be diminished or will it just be enhanced because all of a sudden New York's going to come out heavily regulated, try to get all the tax revenue, and then all the regular smokers, the recreational who are just buying it from their local dealer, are they going to then now switch over to this process? Then now they're going to have to submit their driver's license to a professional. It's a little bit more, you know, regulatory, and it's going to be that way. So the question still remains: Will that revenue number be the same? Will it be a $350 million, or will people still continue to utilize that black market and you know, move away from this regulatory beast that will be coming?
Yeah, and under the equity provisions of the bill, as you're seeing, you know, they're trying to get rid of incarcerated individuals for marijuana-related offenses. They're going to protect the cannabis. We haven't seen this in a lot of states. Some states, yes, some states, no. But they're actually going to protect the industry by saying, you know, you're going to have all the protections of fair housing. You're not going to be able to be, you know, harassed, all this other stuff, just because you work for a dispensary or a grow. And police now cannot use the odor to justify. I was talking about that before. Just because you smell it doesn't mean anything. They're still got to come out with, there is some still rules pertaining to like driving under the influence, and if you can smell it in the car. But that's, you know, once again, I would suspect that everyone on the call would refrain from doing that.
Hey,
The
Jason,
State Department of Health is also, yes.
how about banking, specifically in New York?
We're gonna get into that. It's later on. There's definitely some banking issues we'll talk
One
about.
other, why did samples? I mean, come on. Just kidding.
I'm sorry.
And why didn't you guys bring samples?
I'm sorry, you cut out.
Why didn't you guys bring
Yeah, samples. We'll have, as soon as our clients get up and running in New York and the regulations come out, we'll definitely have more samples. So we do have some. The State Department of Health also talked about technology to detect cannabis while driving, and obviously they're coming up with ways to do that. Taxation impact. They believe it's going to be $4.2 billion industry by 2027. I'm not sure with the illicit market, and we'll talk about that soon. Like Eliyahu brought up, that it's going to hit those numbers for the legal market. The tax collection they're projecting 350 annually. Once again, I think those are pretty high numbers, but you know, we'll see what happens. And projected to create between 30,000 and 60,000 jobs. I 100% agree with that. That might even be light from what I've seen, because it, you know, once again, in a regulatory state, you need certain installation projects for security. You need transportation. There's gonna, I'm gonna be shocked if it doesn't, you know, 280 doesn't go away. If you don't see Uber, you know, Uber Eats delivering it. The bill implements a new cannabis tax structure, which is like, once again, I haven't seen anything like this in other states. There's not only a 9% state tax, there's an additional 4% local tax. And then the manufacturer distributors have to pay a THC tax, which depends on the concentrate in the flower that they're selling. So there's like a 2-level tax system. One is the consumer has to pay a tax when they buy it. And 2, the distributor actually has to pay a tax for, you know, products that they buy from the grow and whatnot. So it's going to raise the price. So the price is not going to be as cheap as people can see it in like Colorado, where you could probably get a pound now, a decent product for like $500. You know, you go to Michigan, it's, you know, $4,500. And that's, you know, a big thing. So it's worth saying. How the money is going to go, they actually said where the money is going to go from the taxation: 40% to education, 40% to community grants, and 20% to drug treatment and public education. And remember, when we talk about this, it's all about equity. When we talk about education and we talk about grants, it's all going to be minority and women owned.
Jason,
I'm sure it's a, yeah.
could I ask you a question?
Yeah, Adam. Of course.
Thank you. Relative to what you were just talking about, price in Colorado versus Michigan versus New York, is there anything in the current acts that are discussing interstate trading and anything along those lines? What's going to prevent Neil from going to the dispensary around the corner from his hotel, picking up a $500 pound and bringing it back to New York, as opposed to, you know, paying the top dollar here in New York?
Well, for one, it's still a federally illegal substance, which means interstate commerce is affected, which means if you do that, you just created a federal crime still. Nothing to do with New York or any legislation in New York or New Jersey, but it's a federal crime, and you can do some really hard time. Remember, we're going to talk about this right now with 280E. It's a Schedule 1 narcotic. It's the same as heroin, right? So if you take 5 pounds, you go to Jersey and buy 5 pounds. I'm not saying Jersey allows that because they don't, but you buy 5 pounds of legal stuff and you travel across New York State line. If they were watching you, it's just like fireworks. Not only are you creating a state crime because you brought it in, but you just created a federal crime with a Schedule 1 drug. You can end up doing a lot of hard time on that. That's with the intent to sell, from the federal statute. So that's what's stopping it from interstate commerce right now, is really the fact that it's illegal federally. This is still an illegal substance according to the Controlled Substances Act, right? And that's a great segue, Adam, to like 280E is it's a federal tax code, and it's literally 5 lines, and here it is. It's no deduction or credit shall be allowed for any amounts paid or incurred during the taxable year in carrying on a trade or business, if such trade or business or the activities which comprises such trade or business consists of trafficking in a controlled substance, which is prohibited by federal law or the law of any state. Summarize some of it, but basically, because it's a Schedule 1 narcotic, you are now not allowed to take any deduction or credit. There have been cases, we're not going to get into all the cases. I'm sure you all read articles, you're allowed to take cost of goods sold. But we've seen a lot of accountants out there make the mistake of what's cost of goods sold and what's not, just because they read some article. And you really should think about whether you want to get involved, because the next part of it is if you make too much of a mistake. We're doing a due diligence. Ryan and I and LIA are doing due diligence right now for a client. They're buying a distributor, and no joke, the tax is like, I don't know, 80% underpaid because of the accountant just not understanding it. In the work papers from the accountant, they literally just took an article that says what is cost of goods sold and what's not from like the tax accounting article from somewhere, and they did it, and they didn't realize that that article was talking about a manufacturer, not a dispensary. And there's a huge liability now, and I'm not sure if the deal will go through because of it. So this accountant that took on, said, "Oh, I'm an expert, I know what I'm doing," did a nice work paper, just totally missed the point. So once again, and by the way, the federal government can come in, if you remember, if you're above 20, I don't remember, 20 or 25% tax paid, there's no statute of limitations because they consider it fraud. So there's a lot going on here. And just remember, you have to understand how it all plays. 280E plays into 471 and some other tax codes. Really, if there's any accountants on the phone or any lawyers on the phone, really understand what you're getting into before this. And it really all goes into the fact that the federal government still classifies this as a Schedule 1 narcotic up there with heroin. So it's no different. The IRS has produced guidelines, and there have been tax court cases about this. The big thing to note is they're not going after the DOJ since the Bush administration has not been going after legal cannabis business inside the state. Once you cross that state line, they are going after it. A few years ago in Oregon, there was so much product, there was not enough people to buy the product. And basically what happened was the federal government came in, and the people that were crossing state lines to sell it in California and other states, they were arresting them on federal drug trafficking charges. So it's really interesting. Regulatory changes. Let's keep going, so we can run through this. Obviously, we talked about the new cannabis management. It will be set up with the New York State Liquor Authority. The office will be in charge of overseeing, developing the regulations, everything. And they're going to set up a 5-member council control board, which will oversee the agency, which will be responsible for all the regulations and, once again, everything from medical marijuana to hemp to recreational. So we're really just at the beginning of this. We don't know what the regulations are going to say. The next thing I'm going to say is the biggest one, and it's really interesting to me. I'm actually working with a client on Long Island. They really want to get into the space. They have a lawyer that told me he's the #1 cannabis lawyer in the country that's gotten licenses. And I started digging down into it, and it wasn't true. He's gotten some licenses, but he didn't get a lot of them. And then he was trying to get a client set up in Nassau County, and Nassau County is basically already said they're going to opt out. Cities, towns, villages, and counties may opt out of adult use. The question is, how is that going to all play in together, because let's say using Nassau County, if the Nassau County opts out, but Town of Hempstead opts in, is that allowed? We're still waiting for the regulations, and I'm hoping that we can understand who and what localities are allowed to opt out. The opt out is going to be interesting because, as some people already stated, it's legal in New York to carry it. So if Nassau County opts out, I can just cross the border to Queens, and I can go get some product and come back, and really they can't do anything. So it's just something to think about. The medical marijuana impacts, and this is, once again, the business side of it, the law prevents really vertical integration of cannabis companies. I don't know why, but there's something against vertical integration in all these laws. It's a very anti, business type of viewpoint, very liberal type of viewpoint. But what they're allowing to do is the medical people with the 10 licenses that already went out, they're allowed to be vertically integrated because they already put so much money into it. They basically lobbied and got it stayed. You also can now, the patients, if you have a medical card, you can purchase a 60-day supply for whatever your script says. So that's really something to think about. Next is the social equity. It's really important to understand the social equity piece if you're going to go for licensing. The state law awards 50% of adult use licenses to economic equity applicants, which is minority and women owned. But once again, the regs will define all that. 40% of the tax revenues from adult use will be funneled to those communities. Financial support will be provided for social equity applicants. I don't know what that's going to look like. We're going to wait to see. And micro businesses will be allowed to form vertical operations. Once again, they get to define micro businesses. It's probably going to be very, very small. It'll probably be inside those 12 plants. But so that means, you can go for a license for you can basically make a personal use person and kind of vertically integrate. Anyone have questions about vertical integration and what that means in cannabis? Sometimes I forget that not everyone has the same jargon, but let me know if there's any questions. And social equity licenses would be prohibited from selling or transferring their licenses. So that's a big one that they saw from other states where someone would go out and get the license and they'd sell their company. So they're going to do it. Here, I know there was a question before about the banking. The Fair Banking Act is like a huge issue. It's all over the news whenever it pops up. The Safe Banking Act is a response to basically it's a federal crime. So it was really hard. 9 years ago when I came in, it was impossible to get banking. And what the cannabis clients I was talking to at that time were putting these bank style vaults in their showroom or inside their grow, and that's where they would hold all the product that wasn't sold yet. That's where they would hold all their cash. When we used to do the business model, we would put in $100,000 for these huge filters because the cash would start to smell and then you really couldn't do anything with it. So you got to make sure the Febreze amount, the amount of Febreze they were using on the cash was insane for some of these clients. That's changed over the last few years. There are banks in New York that do it. The fees are a little bit high, so it prevents the mom and pop marijuana places from getting banking still. Credit unions all do it. And there's also, once again, there's a mix of things. I like to say that if you talk to an accountant, a lawyer, anybody that's in cannabis and they say they have 5+ years experience, ask them ask them the first time they got a call about their client getting kicked out of their bank. If they don't have a good story to tell you, they probably haven't really been in the business for 5 years. I've been woken up at 2 a.m. by clients that finally went through their mail after a long day of working and processing, and they go, "Oh shit, we just got kicked out of our bank, and they're sending us a check tomorrow." They'll definitely wake you up in the middle of the night for that one. So it's basically trying to make it so it's a little bit easier for banks to get involved. Still, the big banks and the FDIC insured banks are going to be still kind of staying away from it. I spoke to someone pretty high up in JP Morgan and Chase. They're nowhere near, comfortable with it yet. It's going to have to be a descheduled product before they get into it. And they will kick you out if they find out that you're involved. So just investing in it can get you kicked out of some of these banks.
Jason, if I can
the Act prohibits regulations. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Well, it's kind of related to the banking, but also, so let's say you have a dispensary or a grower and they have employees and they have the legitimate employees and payroll taxes. I heard back in the early days, there was a problem where you couldn't make your depositories because you don't have banking. What do they do about it now?
Now, I mean, all my clients have banking. Like, so they're all, sometimes you have to set up kind of like a chain that goes from like a local credit union to a bigger national bank in another state. Some states it's hard because these credit unions, there might not be as many. So we have to set up, they have security companies that will actually just charge you 1%. They'll pick up your cash, deposit it into their bank account, and then they'll transfer it to your bank account in a different state. So if you don't have a local bank that you can transfer, but all my clients have payroll, all my client now, this is not, I'm not talking what I was dealing with 9 years ago when I first entered. Now they all have banking. We provide a service where we help you get banking. We had to do this. We had a client that was a brand in California, but they weren't out in California. So, they're in New York. So we got them a New York bank that would take them. We got a California credit union that we finally found that would take them. And we basically had to get a security service that picks up their cash, right? And delivers it and basically puts it into their bank, gets into the credit union, and then they transfer it to the bank in New York so they can operate their business. So sometimes you're still playing around, but it's every day it's getting easier and easier. Every day I get calls from another bank that's opening a cannabis group. Once again, the fees though tend to range from $500 a month to $5,000 a month, depending on the bank, the credit union, the risks profile. So it's still hard, but it's doable. And there's now payroll companies out there. Obviously, Paychex just told us that they're starting a test. They want one of our clients to be one of the test cases in Colorado. So it's opening up every day. But really, the Safe Banking Act was the first step. And once again, there are laws out there right now that are going to deschedule. So it's going from that Schedule 1, maybe most likely making it a Schedule 5, just like they did with hemp. That descheduling law will be huge because then all of a sudden the world is going to open up. I still believe it's a very specialized industry that not, some other accounting firms I'm talking to, as soon as they deschedule, we'll get into the business. Do you know anything about it? So still, I really try to say like cannabis is really a different, world. But yeah, the act would Safe Banking Act would prohibit regulators from terminating or limiting deposits or share insurance for such financial institutions for the sole reason they do business in cannabis. So basically what the Safe Banking Act does is it's telling regulators of the banking industry, you can't basically shut down a bank because they operate in cannabis. That still doesn't help with some other legalities of it. And that's the update for cannabis now. We're here to answer questions as long as we need. So, hopefully you guys have some questions for us and we're happy to answer them.
Jason, I have a particular question because I'm working with a large organization that was developed for the medical. It's over 10 members, but part of the is insurance carriers will not, for the most part, will not insure anyone in the cannabis distribution industry or in the.
So that's not true. There's tons of insurance carriers that'll not only insure the people, they'll insure the grow, they'll insure the product, they'll insure the land, the real estate. All of our clients have insurance. All of our clients have key man insurance policies. It's just a matter of, once again, this is what I say about getting into the space is you got to make a lot of connections in the space. You got to know who to call when you need the certain, the banking. You got to know who to call when you need the insurance. It's hard. Not all insurance carriers will do it, but we have some big insurance players, top 5 insurance companies that will do that.
Okay. Well, I'd love to talk more about that. Talk offline.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So once again, it's all about, and Neil, I know, Neil, I'm pretty sure from our earlier conversations, you're an insurance broker, right?
Yes.
So yeah. So it's all, once again, this is why I say, like, the first thing we started with always for these type of, seminars or just chats is don't get into the space unless you're ready to get into the space. When I started 9 years ago, I told my first client after they went to other accounting firms, I said, give me 2 years to really learn it. It took my other firm and my other firm decided not to go into it. And that's why I switched to Jan over. But it was about 2,500 hours we spent, man hours between research, outside counsel, flying places, meeting with growers, going into grows, meeting with regulators, meeting with insurance people, until we felt comfortable that we had enough connections, we had enough lawyers that actually knew what they were doing. We actually knew what we were doing. We had insurance people that actually knew what they were doing. We have payroll people that actually knew what they were doing. So really, it's if you want to get into the cannabis space and you want to take on clients in the space, I always recommend minimum of 1,000 hours of due diligence and learning and training yourself in the space before you can really jump into it. So it's a big commitment to get into cannabis. I feel so.
A question in terms of the
Any other
retail
question?
commercialization of the products. If I understood you correctly, previously you said that Nassau County had opted out.
They plan on opting out.
They plan, so it
That's
won't
what
be
we're hearing. No one's done anything yet.
So let's assume they opt out. So it won't be available for retail purchase in Nassau. But let's say other parts, whether Suffolk or Queens or city of New York, any other places. Where do you see, I guess, the retail sector going in this? Giving licenses to, let's say, liquor stores because it was kind of tied in with the alcohol bureau, or what type of establishments would be selling them?
So they're going to be dispensaries. They're going to be licensed dispensaries. Whether that licensed dispensary is also a liquor store, I don't know what the regulations are going to say about that. Most states don't allow you to mix alcohol and cannabis. So I can't imagine a liquor store is going to get a license. But what's really interesting is they're following the liquor authority rules, right? So you can't be within 200 feet of a school or church, just like a liquor store, just like a bar. It's considered still like a taboo industry, just like alcohol. And the most interesting part to me is really like people like I was in a CPE where some cannabis expert was talking. He's like, we're going to have a dispensary on Madison Avenue in one of those big spaces. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like, because they don't understand that the rental side, all those buildings where you're talking Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, and the big buildings have hundreds of millions of dollars of loans from federally insured banks. And in those loans, it says you cannot lease to these people. I promise you, they're not risking their loan, and their lawyers aren't letting them risk their loan to lease to a dispensary. So you might find a smaller building where the dispensary operation can buy the building outright for cash, or another building that maybe it's a private loan that doesn't have these terms. But once again, it's still federally illegal. So there's still going to be some challenges to the retail side of things. And once again, we have to wait for the regs, because if they don't allow counties in the regs to opt out, it's just villages. And you'll see some villages in Nassau County and townships opting in and some opting out. But what you're really going to see is dispensaries. I don't know if anyone here has been to dispensaries in other states. They're pretty nice. They're pretty nice. There are some CBD dispensaries, hemp dispensaries in Nassau County in New York. You can go look at them. They're really modeled the same way. But it's a really interesting world. It's going to be dispensaries. There's going to be, I'm sure, some regulations about who you're selling to, so they're not so one person's not buying from too many places and then reselling it. Most states require you to like have your license scanned at the door. It's pretty controlled in other states, and I gotta believe that New York's going to have very high regulations.
So
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
I have a question about the existing dispensaries. So like Curaleaf, so they automatically will be able to do recreational at the same time.
They can automatically apply to get a recreational license at the same time. Yes. Once again, we have to wait for the regs to see how much of that, but they were very, very generous to the outstanding 10 licenses. And they're allowed to stay vertically integrated. They're allowed to, once again, right now they're still allowed to sell medical, and medical is a lot less regulatory. What I mean by that is there's a lot less restrictions on what they can do as long as they're selling to a patient. and they are going to be allowed to get a first offer at a recreational license.
So do you have any idea what that would do to price? Because I've had a medical card for a couple of years now. It's been amazing for my migraines, but would it change the price? So if I'm going in for medicine, essentially, that's different from someone coming in recreationally. Would it change the price?
It is. The price is really going to be depending on the market, right? Right now, the price is pretty high in New York just because there's really not a lot of patients, believe it or not. You have 10 licenses. These people are put tens of millions of dollars. We worked on one deal where they over $100 million company bought a license in New York and got it transferred to them. I mean, if you think about that, that's a lot of money laid out, and there's really not a lot of patients to make profits yet in New York. And once again, we didn't really go into it that much, but Eliyahu brought it up. The illicit market, or what we call the black market, is going to be around for a long time. I think it's going to be really hard for companies to make a profit in New York, even recreational or medical, for at least 5 years. And what we've seen in other states is the 280E provisions. New York didn't decouple, which means the tax rates are extremely high, not just for the sales tax and use, but income taxes are extremely high. To make profits after income taxes is almost going to be impossible in New York in the beginning.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's why I was concerned
I
about
can't
price.
imagine prices are going to go down.
Yeah, so that was my concern. It's expensive now. So going up won't be fun. Do you see any prospect for the medical deduction for the medication?
No, because once again, New York didn't decouple for 280, for federal purposes. So basically it's still illegal federally, so you can't deduct it for the state either as of now. We don't know what the regs might come in and say, but I think that decoupling for that type of stuff needs to be law. So there was a missed opportunity, but you have to remember that New York also wants the income, right, from it. So keeping under these statutes keeps a large amount of money coming into New York. So sometimes the money runs the show. So yeah, I mean, we think that the illicit market isn't going away anytime soon. This could be a lot cheaper on the illicit market. People already know it, and some of these legal changes actually makes the illegal market easier, right? No one can come up to you if they search your house and they find 4 pounds of marijuana. They can be like, "Where did you buy it from?" No, I have it. I don't remember where I bought it from. It's you're also allowed to grow your own plant, which is nice. So if you are a medical user, believe it or not, you can buy the seeds. You can get a growing kit on Amazon. You can spend $1,000 and start growing your own marijuana. It won't be as good as the medical grade, which you're going to see as medical and recreational. It's all going to be medical grade. But you can basically grow your own cannabis, in your house. So I wonder what that's going to do to the bill, like heavy users, or are they just gonna, if they have the room for it, are they just gonna grow it? I know people in college that grew just fine in their closet. Are people gonna start doing that, or are they gonna want to go to the legal markets, or are they gonna want to go to the illicit markets? It's the illicit market in New York is really ingrained. I just don't see it going away so fast.
Jason, along those lines, relative to growing it in your own home, I mean, and you were talking before about the kinship between the new marijuana regulatory agency in New York and the liquor department. I don't know what it's called here in New York, but obviously at home
Liquor authority,
you can brew your own beer, you can make your own vodka, you can do all of those things in your own home as well. So historically looking at that did not have an impact on sales in the public. And I would tend to think that the novelty of being able to grow your own pot is going to wear off at a time, but it's going to be there at the beginning. And of course, if prices skyrocket the way that you are intimating that they will, then maybe it'll take a little bit longer for that aspect to run off. Are companies that are looking to get into this taking that into consideration in their projections? Is there something that they're really doing to kind of fend off everybody's going to grow it at home?
So when I say everyone's going to grow it at home, I don't think everyone's going to grow it at home, but I think it plays into the illicit market, right? The people that are selling it right now, they're going to be allowed to have 12 plants growing legally. So what does that mean? Are they going to have their friends? Are they going to set up their friends with grows? And they're going to keep the illicit market? Is that going to keep the illicit market around, right? I don't think that, like, I have friends that are heavy users. I don't think it's just going to, they're going to keep calling their, drug dealer, and they're going to keep getting it. And those people are going to use the at home to get, to produce their product. But also, so, I mean, my favorite story is we do a lot of financial modeling in the space. It's one of our, like, key aspects of our cannabis group. We do it. We've done it for about 15 different states, multiple companies, ton of stuff. The first one we did, believe it or not, we built the cannabis business model. We went out to market with it. We got a call from a guy in Missouri, Utah. I don't remember which one it was for him. We'd done multiple for them. And basically, they paid $150,000 to a cannabis expert to put a model together. And they sent it to us, and they said, "Can you help us?" And I looked at the model, and no joke, it was just a supply-based model where they were just saying, "Okay, here's what we can produce, here's what we sell it at, it's done." When you dug down into it, the state put out some information about how many patients they thought had. This model, there was going to be 5 licenses in this state. So you figured 20, maybe if you were really good, you can get to 50% of this, 50% of the demand of the state. But let's say you say 20% of the state. And this model was, no joke, producing 12,000% of the state demand that the state was estimating for an application. So yeah, people are modeling this out, but we've seen a ton of some, just like, once again, we were at a show once, and the person behind us was a financial modeler for cannabis. We opened his book and we were just laughing. It was all supply-based models. I can produce this much, I can sell this much. That's really not how it works, especially in medical or regulatory states. Now, in New York, once again, you're going to have to model out that demand and figure out how much people are going to leave their illicit market and how that's going to grow over time. We're doing one model for New York right now, and once again, we don't have the regs, so it's really hard, but we're saying it's going to take 5 to 10 years before the illicit market, it really kind of fluctuates down, depending on the inputs in the model. So I think that anyone looking to get into the space, if you think you're going to make money in the first 5 years, I really just doubt it. Between the high tax rates, I want to say cash on cash profits. So talking, your old advisors and stuff in the group, cash on cash profits is going to be so bad. It's you'd be so in the red for the first 5 to 10 years. My group, we're a New York firm. We were never big on New York. We think there's other states you can make a lot more money in the short term. In the long term, if cannabis gets descheduled at the federal level, that can change very, very quickly. And New York can be one of the biggest states.
Jason, I equate this almost, as far as, people doing their own, brewing their own beer, doing this. I can, my personal is my own household. If I'm going to somebody's house, my wife is, believe you me, is not going to bake cookies. She's going to go to ShopRite and buy cookies. Okay. And there's plenty of people out there that think that are not going to grow their own. They're going to buy still. They're going to buy. I think people are going to buy.
There will, but once again, I think we're missing the point when we say people are going to grow their own. I think that growing your own is just going to keep the illicit market alive. So the drug dealer now has the ability of basically just growing as much as they want, right? And keeping the prices down. They don't pay taxes. They don't pay all this other stuff. They're just taking their cash profit and keeping it in their pocket. It's going to be, the illicit market is not going to go away in New York for a long, long time.
Until New York does something about it.
Especially since it's even harder to crack down. Well, how do you crack down on the illicit market when you're not allowed to bring up any, you're not allowed to question people who are smoking. Someone has all these 50 to 75 joints on them. You can't ask them questions. You can't arrest them. You can't do that. Someone in their house, you have a search warrant. You go in because you have one thing and you find 5 pounds of marijuana. They could have bought that illegally. You're really not allowed to ask them any questions about it. Hey, it's legal. Goodbye. So I think it's those rules, which are great, I think, for the equity piece of the equation, are really going to have trouble getting rid of the illicit market. Right. And I agree with you. I don't think the person is going to do it. But once again, the price difference, you go out and buy cookies, the price difference between you baking them and the time spent versus is not going to be significant, where I do think the price will be significant. I mean, the price is going to be high in New York.
Oh, you did also say, I mean, 12 plants, 12 plants. That's quite a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of
Once again,
plants
there's
to
grow
have.
cycles. So 12 plants, if you plant one every month, you have a supply for enough people for a long time.
Yep.
But once again, it depends. I mean, once again, I know friends of mine in college that just, they found baggies from their freshman year of high school and they would still smoke it. That's like compared to the medical grade stuff that Tanya's getting and stuff. It's like night and day,
Right.
And once again, people are moving away from flower. We're seeing, I think in 10 years, you're not going to see flower anymore. No one's going to use a bowl. No one's going to use a joint. It's all going to be edibles. It's all going to be drinks. It's all going to be this type of stuff. But it really depends on where it goes federally with how quickly that happens.
I
Nice.
completely agree. I have no desire to ever go into the flower space. Tinctures are much easier. And I would not try to mess with not knowing what I'm doing. I will have to pay.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I think the rec market is going to see some much higher prices than medical as well. You look at like Massachusetts, the state has kept down the medical prices compared to the recreational prices.
Well, in the essence of time,
So
I find this presentation extremely valuable. We're going to give out after the meeting as well. This has been recorded and we can send it on a thank you. But the main thing is knowing who to go, where to go to when you run into a situation, whether it's a cannabis company or you have a company cannabis. It applies to all our areas. Risa does payroll. I don't know what it is, but I think it's becoming very topical very quick, and really appreciate you guys. And I'm sure we could do 10 seminars. And again, it's going to change next. So it's nice to know that you're on top, you're in the game, and understand that you have to certainly, I'm looking at Phil, it's going to business valuation, going to affect insurance. It just affects all our field. So thank you for the presentation. A hectic time, and thank you all for coming. And I encourage everybody to join. Remember, LIAFPN.org. You can join us. It's a small fee. Part of what we do is we make quality introductions to different people. And that's a big thing. Our next speaker, I think it's our next speaker. We're not going to do the first week of June. We're going to do the second week of June because that's Memorial Day week. And Kim Taylor is here. She will be our next speaker. And Kim, you could just stay with pieces talking.
I'm sorry, Neil, I didn't hear you. You broke up there.
Okay, you're going to be our next speaker. So you could just tell everybody what you do and what.
Oh, okay. Hi, morning, everybody. Yes, Kim Taylor. My company is Settlement Funding Associates, and we place tax-exempt structured settlement annuities for personal injury plaintiffs and income and tax-deferred annuities for personal injury medical malpractice attorneys. We do it on a nationwide basis, and we're located in Fort Lee, New Jersey.
Terrific. So thank you. Appreciate you all coming. LIAFPN.org. Please ask us questions. Any more information, certainly forward everybody that spoke today. Again, Jason, thanks a lot. Thanks for
pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
All right, have a good day,
Thank
everyone.
you. Great presentation.
Thanks, Neil.
All right.
Very nice.
Nice.
Have a great day, everyone. Take
Thanks.
care.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too.